So the scientific method is all about observation. However, the observation that scientists bring to bear on whatever they're measuring has a fundamental perspective. It's a point of view which they're observing things from, and the MD point of view regarding the pathogenesis of disease is quite frankly incorrect. There's no politically correct way to say it. It's incorrect. It's biased before the fact, but the medical doctors do not know that it's biased before the fact, and this is why we're in such a pickle with medical treatment here in the United States, quite frankly in North America and all around the world in industrialized nations, because we have been following the MD's lead for 100 years. Now let me just give you an example of what I'm talking about. Remember, science is about observation and measurement, right? So if you walked outside tomorrow morning and you just lay down on your porch or on your front yard, and all day long you watched the sun move across the sky, and then at nighttime you watched the moon move across the sky, you could reasonably come to the conclusion that both the sun and the moon revolve around the earth. I mean, you saw it. You just saw it. You measured it. You timed how long it took. You might have had a telescope or binoculars, but you watched the whole thing. The sun moves, the moon moves. Well, because of your perspective, you were unaware that the sun's motion was apparent because of the rotation of the earth on its axis, and the sun isn't moving at all relative to the earth in this regard. It is in fact the earth that's revolving on its axis, and that's what makes the sun appear to move. And conversely, the moon actually is spinning around the earth. So it would be easy to assume that it was the sun that was moving around the earth just by looking at the measurement from your particular perspective, and you would be wrong. Now, some of the times you'd be right. You'd be right about the moon, but you'd be wrong about the sun. And this is the problem with the MD view of medicine, because every once in a while they get it right. But most of the time they get it wrong. But every once in a while they get it right. Now, interestingly enough, in the world of behavioral psychology, if you're trying to get a laboratory rat to run through a maze, right? And they do these experiments. You can do this at home if you want. If you're trying to get a rat to run through a maze, the rat will negotiate the maze much more efficiently if the rat is rewarded randomly. If every time you reward the rat when he goes through the maze, you reward him, he'll get lazy and he won't want to do it anymore. Well, this is how science is in the 21st century. MDs get it right a small percentage of the time, and it gives them determination to take another shot at it. And it is their perspective which lends a faulty understanding of how things work. And this couldn't be more true than with sickle cell anemia. Okay? So I want to set the stage here by saying that the MD view of the pathogenesis of sickle cell anemia has a fundamental built-in flaw that the MDs are blind to. They don't know what they don't know, and they're interpreting datum points incorrectly. All right? But because it's one big boys club, and because it's all about ego, and it's all about hubris, and it's all about money, when you say something over and over and over and over and over again, people just accept it as real. And this is why Max Planck, one of Einstein's contemporaries, said that medical science, science in general, progresses one funeral at a time, which means that the scientific community has some of the biggest amount of inertia, intellectual inertia of any professional organization, because scientists tend to lean heavily on the dogma that they were trained in. And they're not open to new ideas. They're not open to giving up beliefs that they've held for 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. They're not going to do that. You know, which gives rise to one of my favorite sayings, that an old falsehood is much more accepted than a new truth. And this is just human nature. So let's get into it with sickle cell anemia, shall we? Now, sickle cell anemia affects red blood cells. This is what a healthy red blood cell looks like. It looks like a little frisbee with a little indentation in the middle. And the job of the red blood cell is to carry oxygen to the body. It's the main thing that the red blood cell does. It transports oxygen that you've just inhaled to different parts of the body. Right now, when red blood cells get funky, and that's a technical term, right? A fancy schmancy doctor term. When red blood cells get funky, they lose their structural integrity and they start to become misshapen. And the shape that they most commonly divert to is a sickle cell shape, much like this here, right? Okay? This is a loss of the structural integrity of the red blood cell. The entire mass of the red blood cell is still here. It's not like all of this is gone. It's that the red blood cell has collapsed in on itself because of a structural deformity in the wall, the membrane of the red blood cell. Okay? And it's called sickle cell because guess what? It looks like a sickle. Again, medical people aren't that creative in their descriptive terms. But sickle cell anemia is called sickle cell because it looks like a sickle under the right circumstances. Now, this was an artist's rendition. This is an actual microscopic picture of somebody's blood with sickle cell anemia. So here's a healthy red blood cell. Here's another healthy red blood cell. Here's another healthy red blood cell, kind of edge on. And here, of course, is a sickle cell. Here's another sickle cell. Here's another sickle cell here. This is a really good representation of a sickle cell, all right? So sickle cell anemia is a problem with the red blood cells, and they have lost their structural integrity, collapsed in on themselves, and formed a sickle. Now, this is a big problem because with red blood cells, it's all about the structure. Because remember, what do red blood cells move through? They move through your blood vessels, and it's kind of hard to fit a square peg in a round hole, right? The red blood cells are circular and disc-shaped on purpose because as a disc, with elasticity, it's easy for them to move through the blood vessels. Here's the MD view of what's going on with sickle cell anemia. Remember, this is their perspective on this illness, okay? This is contemporary, cutting-edge, scientific thought on what causes sickle cell anemia, and it's incorrect. And I'm going to explain why it's incorrect in a minute, all right? But this is what the MDs believe. And by the way, MDs don't practice medicine. They practice allopathic medicine. Nobody practices medicine. Medicine's a vast domain. I practice naturopathic medicine. There's chiropractic medicine, homeopathic medicine, acupuncture, traditional Chinese medicine, Ayurveda, so forth and so on, right? MDs practice allopathic medicine. It's a reductionistic philosophy, really old-fashioned and outdated. But the allopathic view is that sickle cell anemia is genetic, that it is caused by a mutation of a gene, and it is an inherited disorder referred to as autosomal recessive, which again is fancy schmancy doctor talk, the intention of which is to make you feel intellectually inferior and bow to the presence of the great intellect of the MD. You know, it's really kind of an easy concept to understand when you wrap your head around genetics. Now look, I'm not saying that we don't have genes and that we don't have chromosomes. Of course we do. And I'm not saying that chromosomes can't be manipulated, and of course they can, but the view of the MD as to the background generative process which brings to the foreground sickle-celled red blood cell is incorrect. They believe it's an inherited genetic disorder, and they agree that it's caused by a mutation in a particular gene on the chromosome. It is a mutation in a particular gene on a chromosome. That's their belief. It is a mutation in a particular gene on a chromosome. And because of the mutated gene, the red blood cell loses its elasticity. And because it's no longer elastic, it collapses in on itself. Kind of like a soap bubble that bursts. But it's a little bit different, because in this case, the soap bubble wouldn't burst. It would just kind of collapse in on itself into a sickled shape. All right, now, understand, like if I'm going outside and I'm looking at the sun and it's moving around the earth, I could reasonably incorrectly assume that it's the sun that's moving. I mean, just look. I have all this evidence. It's the sun that's moving, you knucklehead. Well, no, it's not, because in point of fact, a curious thing happens. The only thing that has been known in contemporary allopathic scientific circles to cure, to eliminate, and MDs rarely use the cure word, but in allopathic reductionistic MD circles, the only treatment that's ever been shown to cure sickle cell anemia is a bone marrow transplant, because red blood cells are made in the bone marrow. But when they do a bone marrow transplant, they don't take all of the marrow everywhere in your body out. They take just a little piece out of your long bones, and they put it back. They put somebody else's marrow in there, and that will most of the time eliminate the sickle cell condition if you get it soon enough in kids. But if that's the case, then it can't be an inherited genetic disorder. Because if it were an inherited genetic disorder, you'd still have sickle cells being produced by your blood, your bone marrow, and non-sickle cells produced by the transplanted bone marrow, and it doesn't make sense. And also, if it were truly genetic, you would expect there to be less and less and less sickle cell anemia, because the weak people in the herd get outproduced, right? Genetic disorders are supposed to go away. But there's a disconnect here. And the scientists, because of their inertia, reject the data that does not support their supposition and accepts the data that does support their supposition. It's like looking at the moon and the sun. Well, the moon moves around the earth, so the sun must too. And I'm telling you, it is just a big bad voodoo daddy, because it's like one giant ship of fools, and the MD profession is amongst the most cowardly medical profession, scientific profession I've ever met. Nobody questions authority. And everybody just accepts everything as fact just because 100 people have been saying it for 10 years. It's reality by consensus, and it is a gigantic problem. So here's the holistic view of how sickle cell anemia happens. It is in fact a mutation in the hemoglobin gene. But the mutation in the hemoglobin gene is not a genetic. It's not because there's a bad gene. It's not like there's a gene that codes for sickle cell anemia. There's a chromosome that's become broken. There's genetic material that's become damaged. There's genetic material that's become mutated because of lack of nutrition. So when a particular area of a particular chromosome doesn't have enough selenium, copper, or vitamin B12, the chromosomal material becomes damaged. And when the chromosomal material becomes damaged, it can't make red blood cells the way that nature intended it to. It's not a gene. It's an area of chromosomal damage. There's a big difference between a gene that codes for cystic fibrosis, or a gene that codes for Down syndrome, or a gene that codes for sickle cell anemia, and a broken chromosome. There's a gigantic difference. But because MDs over there, where am I? Because MDs have no training, no respect, no experience, and no appreciation for medical nutrition, they have no idea at all about the relationship between malnutrition and chromosomal material. Zero. They don't have any. So they've thrown the baby out with the bathwater, and they have misinterpreted the data the same way that if you looked up at the sun, you would misinterpret its movement. But because the profession is one gigantic you-know-what, nobody questions authority, and all of a sudden these misconceptions become accepted scientific fact. Kind of like evolution. Now, you know, species evolve. Different species of birds will change their beak and their feathers and the size of their head based on environmental food stress. And that's accepted. But there's never been anybody anywhere in the annals of science to actually prove that a bird changes into a snake, changes into a frog, changes into a monkey, changes into a man. It's never been proven. It's 100% theoretical speculation. Even Darwin himself questioned the fact of interspecies evolutionary change, and quite frankly, if, you know, there was such a thing as interspecies evolutionary change, why are there still frogs? Because frogs were around in dinosaur days. So everything else evolved. Why didn't the frog evolve? And why are there still frogs? There's a lot of disconnect. And scientists reject things that don't fit in with their dogma and accept stuff that does. So, oh, look, it's the moon. We know the moon goes around the earth. The sun must too. And so we march forward blindly into our doom. Now, the problem with sickle cell anemia is the shape of the red blood cell does all kinds of funky things as it's moving through your bloodstream. And in patients that have sickle cell anemia, they have things called crises, sickle cell crises, which bring them to the hospital 3, 4, or 5 times a year. And here's a short list of sickle cell crises. The shape of the cells, the sickle cells, can actually clog up and block a blood vessel, kind of like leaves cluttering up a drain in your street, right? And then you get water backs up and you get a flood. The spleen is an organ which filters your blood, and when the sickle cells get into the spleen, they can clog up the blood vessels in the spleen and cause the spleen to become enlarged. That can turn into a medical emergency. If a number of sickle cells get into a blood vessel in the brain and clog it up, you can get a stroke because the tissue immediately around there loses oxygen. Because remember, the sickle cells, the red blood cell carries oxygen, and the sickle cell, because of its shape, carries much less oxygen than a normal red blood cell does. You can get bone infections from the presence of the sickle cells in the capillaries of bones. You can get kidney failure for the same reason, that the sickle cells clog up the blood vessels in the kidney, and then the kidney cells start to die because they don't have enough oxygen, and then your kidneys fail. It's not good. You can get anemia. Anemia, it's called aplastic anemia. It's fancy schmancy doctor talk for not enough red blood cells. Because sickle cells last for 10 to 20 days and normal red blood cells last for 90 to 120 days. So if your sickle cells are dying off, your body doesn't know when to make new red blood cells. So there's a lag time and you can get anemic just because of the dynamics of the time frame inside of which red blood cells are made. It's very interesting. Now, here's a couple more pictures. Normal red blood cells moving through a blood vessel. You know, it's like going down a slip and slide. And they're elastic, remember? They're pliable and they're elastic. And they're zipping down the blood vessels and they get into a little jam and they just squeeze together and slip through like a mouse. Ever seen a mouse trying to sneak through the wall? I mean, a mouse can fit into a hole that small. It's crazy, right? It's the same with a red blood cell. But a sickle cell, remember, has lost its elasticity. So instead of like a little rubber ball moving through the blood, now you have a stick. When you get a stick moving through the blood vessels, it's going to cause all kinds of problems. And this is what happens. You get the sickle cells clogging up blood vessels, so no blood can get down this vessel, right? Here's another picture of it. So the sickle cells will jam up a particular branch of an artery or a vein, and so no more blood can get through here, just a little bit. So it's things like this due to the structure and the lack of elasticity of the sickle cell that causes all of these sickle cell crises that bring sickle cell patients to the hospital 4 to 5 times a year, which is a normal thing for someone with sickle cell anemia. They have to go to the hospital because they're going to die if they don't. And you know, what does the medical doctor do? Well, they do heroic medicine that they're good at. You know, they can save the spleen from exploding, right? They can save the kidney from failing. But they can't fix the cause of this because they're blind as to the cause of it, and they think that it's an inherited genetic problem when in fact it's not a gene, it's a defect in a chromosome based on lack of nutrients. Okay? Now, here's how we know this. I thought you'd never ask. Well, my colleague, Dr. Joel Wallach, was in charge of $25 million of research from 1970 to 1982. They did 26,000 autopsies, and there's Dr. Wallach back in the day doing this research. This, by the way, was the first animal besides a human being that was diagnosed with cystic fibrosis. And before Dr. Wallach's research, it was assumed incorrectly, right? There goes the sun again. It was assumed incorrectly that cystic fibrosis was a humans only disease and that it couldn't cross species lines, but Wallach proved that it could. This was the first primate, besides a human, ever to get cystic fibrosis. Wallach made a breakthrough discovery, and he also proved that cystic fibrosis was not genetic. Again, there was no gene that codes for cystic fibrosis. It was a misinterpretation of an area of chromosomal damage. Again, chromosomal damage, not a gene. It's a damage to the genetic material. Damage caused by not enough maternal nutrition. Specifically in this regard with cystic fibrosis, selenium. Well, the result of all of this research was a scientific research publication called The Diseases of Exotic Animals, which is now in the Smithsonian Institute. And it's the result of $25 million, 26,000 autopsies, and 12 years of research conducted by Dr. Wallach. And one of the things that Wallach noticed when he was doing this was that white-tailed deer who he was treating, or who showed up with an illness called white muscle disease, which is also muscular dystrophy or fibromyalgia, depending on how you want to slice it. from our point of view, by the way, fibromyalgia, muscular dystrophy, and white muscle disease are all the same thing. It's just more and more and more tissue destruction and, you know, which muscles are affected. So Wallach saw all these white-tailed deer showing up with white muscle disease, and white muscle disease, the veterinarian community knows, is eliminated by selenium. It's a simple selenium deficiency, selenium being a trace mineral. So these deer also had sickled red blood cells, just coincidentally. And when Wallach gave the deer selenium, an injection of selenium to fix the white muscle disease, the sickle cells vanished. Now, if it was genetic, this couldn't have happened, right? Because there's no amount of vitamin or drug or anything that I can do to change the color of your eyes or your sex, right? I mean, you know, you can manipulate the body and cut things off and add things, but you're really still a man or a woman. Well, if it was genetic, this would not have been able to have happened, but it did. And this led the way for Dr. Wallach's understanding of the pathogenesis of the sickle cell trait. So from the medical nutritional point of view, sickle cell anemia is caused by a deficiency in copper, selenium, and vitamin B12. Copper, selenium, and vitamin B12. And when your body doesn't have enough copper, selenium, or vitamin B12, especially if your mother, while you're developing in utero, doesn't have enough copper, selenium, or vitamin B12, the genes that code for healthy red blood cells get damaged. And then you're born with damaged chromosomes, which are to a certain extent baked into the cake. So you're always going to be having sickle cells. But if you supplement aggressively with B12, copper, and selenium, you can dramatically reduce the number of cells that are sickled in the blood and eliminate the hospital crises that send sickle cell patients to the hospital. The same way that if you have someone who's born with Down syndrome, which is a zinc deficiency in the chromosome during development, if you supplement a Down syndrome kid from birth through adulthood and clean their diet up and give them all the 90 essential nutrients that they need, they will be highly functioning Down syndrome kids. They'll be able to hold a job and get married. Well, it's the same with sickle cell patients. You can't never make all the sickle cells go away 100%. Well, maybe you can. We're waiting to see if that happens. Haven't seen it yet. But the crises that are associated with sickle cell disappear. And that's a beautiful thing. So what do? Well, the recommendation to support and promote the structure and function of red blood cells in the face of a diagnosis of sickle cell anemia is 1 healthy start pack per 100 pounds of body weight per month. And selenium. The dosage of selenium is a little bit different here with sickle cell anemia. It's 4 capsules per 100 pounds of body weight per day. And then you add 2 capsules a day for every additional 50 pounds. So if you're 150 pounds, you take 6 a day. If you're 200 pounds, you take 8 a day. If you're 250 pounds, and so forth. Okay? So this is how Dr. Wallach doses selenium for cystic fibrosis patients. And we must not forget the vitamin B12. And that's found in the longevity product called De-Stress. And this is the recommended dosage: 4 capsules at 100 pounds, 2 if you're 50 pounds, plus 2 additional capsules a day for every additional 50 pounds. All right? So this gives us the B vitamins, this gives us the selenium and the copper, and this gives us the rest of the 90 essential nutrients that the body needs in order to make all of this stuff work. And if you have someone who has sickle cell anemia and they get on this program and they clean their diet up, this will support and promote the structure and function of their red blood cells to such an extent that their crises will virtually vanish. But don't believe me. Talk to this guy. This guy is in Atlanta, Georgia. He's a longevity guy. His name is Parnell Abraham. He's heavily involved with the Sickle Cell Association of Georgia. And since 2000, the year 2000, he's diagnosed with sickle cell anemia since birth. And since working with Dr. Wallach since 2000 and taking longevity products, he's had, I think, 2 crises in 13 years. Normally, sickle cell patients have 4 or 5 a year. Parnell's had a couple in 13 years. Is Parnell with us tonight? He told me he might show up. I don't see him. In any event, Parnell and a number of other people, I'm going to think of these guys' names in a minute. Dirk Twine down in Atlanta, Georgia, who I'm going to be lecturing for in about a month. Parnell Abraham and the Sickle Cell Association of Georgia are making inroads into the sickle cell community, telling them this message. But the problem that they're having sociologically is most people in the United States who have sickle cell anemia are African Americans. And most of the African Americans who have sickle cell anemia are poor. They're lower class, don't have enough money to spend on the 90 essential nutrients and extra selenium, and they've become culturally conditioned to getting their medical services through Medicare and Medicaid. And so it's a difficult task to get people off of the Medicare dole onto longevity because, you know, the supplements aren't cheap. And this is the trouble that they're having with the Sickle Cell Association of Georgia. But the people like Parnell and a lot of others, I had a guy on my radio show a couple weeks ago, I forget his name. He might be with us in the chat room tonight. If you are, identify yourself. I'm sorry that I can't remember your name. I talk to hundreds of people a week. But having remarkable success with elimination of sickle cell crises, and their energy comes back, their mood comes back, their sleep gets better, their appetite gets better, everything improves. Because when you support and promote the structure and function of the human body with science-based, clinically verified medical nutrition, the body fixes itself to the ability that it is able to, and it's a remarkable thing. Sickle cell anemia is not caused by a bad gene. It's caused by a genetic defect, a mutated gene, and the mutation is caused by lack of nutrition. It's not an inherited mutation. The mutation is there because of lack of nutrition in the blood of the mother when she was pregnant. Period. There goes the sun again. You get it? You with me? Okay. All right, so that's the long and the short of it for sickle cell anemia. It's a really kind of a easy intervention to support and promote the structure and function of the red blood cells. It's very easy to do. And this, of course, is delivered through the holistic perspective. This is for the guests in the audience tonight. The holistic perspective argues that the human body has the need for 90 essential nutrients, 60 minerals, 16 vitamins, 12 amino acids, and 2 essential fatty acids in order to maintain its health. This is the stuff your body needs to stay healthy. And this is why you might see this slogan on a lot of the longevity stuff, 90 for life. This is what it refers to. The 90 essential nutrients necessary for life, but it's impossible to get all 90 nutrients from food. You can't do it. Why is it impossible to get all 90 essential nutrients from food? Because the lion's share, 66% of your body's nutrient needs are minerals. Things like calcium and selenium and zinc and iron. Only problem with minerals is only God makes minerals. Plants cannot make minerals, and animals cannot make minerals. We get minerals from the roots of the plants that are grown in soil that has minerals in it, and the roots suck the minerals into the plant, and then we eat the plant. Or the animal eats the plant, and then we eat the animal. That's how we get minerals into the human body. But the minerals are not evenly spread out in the soil. This is what we need for sickle cell, for red blood cell health. Selenium, it's one of them. Well, here's a map of selenium deposition in the soil in the U.S. And here's the legend. This color, there's a lot of selenium, and the further down we go, less and less and less until there's none. So if you live here and you're eating organic farmers market vegetables grown from right down the street, there's 0 selenium in it. And you are at risk to get a selenium deficiency disease. And don't get pregnant if you're a woman and you live here, because there's a high risk that your child is going to have cystic fibrosis, muscular dystrophy, or sickle cell anemia. Right? Look, you didn't know what you didn't know. And this is one map. There are 59 other maps for all the other minerals, and there's no place on the planet where there's all 60 minerals. It doesn't exist. Which lends to one of life's greatest ironies, that no matter how well you eat, you're completely undernutrified unless you're supplementing. I don't care if you have a PhD in organic farming and own 100 acres in Switzerland and only eat the stuff you grow. Here's what your body needs to be healthy: 90 essential nutrients. 90. Filled to the brim every day. Here's what you get from your food: less than half. And then you experience the stress of life, and it burns through your reserves, and then something breaks. So your sickle cell anemia gets 100 times worse. You get high blood pressure, which is a calcium deficiency. You get an osteoporosis, which is a phosphorus and a calcium and a magnesium deficiency. You get something because your heart or your lungs or your kidney or your red blood cells or your joints or your skin or your brain or your eyes ran out of the raw materials they needed to stay healthy. It's that simple. But your medical doctor is not trained in this. Your medical doctor has 0 understanding about this. 0. There goes the sun again. So if you get a chronic disease, your medical doctor throws a drug at it, and you cannot fix a nutrient deficiency with a drug. And which is why everybody in North America is sick. And which is why our economies are collapsing based on the inexorable, exorbitant cost of healthcare. And when you just manage illnesses, it gets worse. You guaranteed, you've got mold in your basement, you just paint over it, it's gonna get worse. Which is why we recommend that you fire your MD now, because they are inequipped clinically to help you in the face of a chronic disease. But don't worry, we've got your back. Healing is easy. Surgery is complicated. Healing is easy. If you're suffering with an issue revolving around inappropriate blood sugar metabolism, type 1 diabetes, type 2 diabetes, syndrome X, metabolic syndrome, insulin resistance, the recommendation to support and promote the structure and function of blood sugar metabolism: 1 healthy blood sugar pack per 100 pounds of body weight per month. That's a really good place to start. If you're dealing with a bone or a joint problem, arthritis or osteoporosis or bunions or plantar fasciitis or Charcot's foot or whatever, in order to support and promote the musculoskeletal system, the recommendation is 1 healthy bone and joint pack per 100 pounds of body weight per month. It's a very good place to start. Let's say you have a cognitive problem, can't concentrate, or you have a heart condition, congestive heart failure or clogged arteries or whatever. A really good thing to do is to provide your cardiovascular system and your brain with the raw materials they need to optimize their structure and function. And guess what? We've got you covered. It's called the Healthy Brain and Heart Pack. Not a bad place to start. If you're bothered with a digestive issue, heartburn, irritable bowel, ulcerative colitis, inflammatory bowel disease, celiac disease, a good place a good thing to do is to provide your body with the nutrition it needs to support and promote the structure and function of your digestive tract, and we've got your back. Because healing is easy. You've been brainwashed, for lack of a better word, by 100 years of pharmaceutical profiteering propaganda, that healing is a complicated, sophisticated deal that can only happen in high-tech, multi-million-dollar expensive hospitals. It's nonsense. Surgery is complicated. Healing is easy. Oh, and by the way, once you do this and it works, we will pay you to help us spread our message, because the front door of medicine is guarded by the pharmaceutical industry. When Dr. Wallach proved that cystic fibrosis could cross species lines and that it was related to a deficiency in maternal nutrition, they fired him. They kicked him out. Because they didn't want to cure the disease. They cure the disease, they lose their funding. Oh, and by the way, selenium, the mineral selenium, which was in fact a big factor in helping people to get on the other side of cystic fibrosis, is a naturally occurring substance, so you cannot patent it so anybody can make it, and there's no money in it. And medicine in North America is a for-profit runaway train. Now, let me say that once more. Medicine in North America is a for-profit runaway train. They're only trained in how to manage illness with drugs and surgery. And like Dr. Phil says, how's that working for you? You're okay with that? God bless you, it's a free country. I'm not okay with that. And you know, this is what we have to do. Seminars like this, free webinars like this. When was the last time your medical doctor gave a free webinar? When was the last time any cardiovascular specialist, hematological specialist told you anything about sickle cell anemia or anything else? Did I hear you say never? Well, guess what? We're generating a grassroots coalition of the informed people who hear our message of health recovery through science-based, clinically verified medical nutrition, try it for themselves, see the difference it generates in themselves, and then they get excited about it and tell their friends and family. For goodness sake, that's why you were invited here tonight. Someone in our organization got fire in their belly because they see what this can do. And they just had to tell you. They couldn't sleep at night until they told you. This is what we're up to. We're generating a grassroots coalition of the informed. Now, there's two ways you can interface with us. You can talk to the person that brought you to this webinar tonight. Tell them your health concern, and they'll tell you what to do to support and promote that part of your body with medical nutrition, because we have trained them to do it. Because remember, healing is easy. Or you can join our merry band of men, women, and children, spreading our message of health recovery through medical nutrition, and we will pay you. The Longevity Company has created over 100 multimillionaires. And how did they make money? By lifting up their friends and family members and church members into health. So talk to the person that invited you here tonight. See how you fit with us, if at all. I encourage you to try the appropriate healthy start pack plus the diet for 90 days. Because the proof of the pudding is in the eating, and this is how our profession progresses through generating clinical results. I mean, honest to God, in an oppressive political climate like this, my profession, you know, we are the red-headed stepchild that nobody wants to pay attention to, and yet this profession and this company thrives. This company was just recognized, the Longevity Company was just recognized yesterday as the 96th most successful networking business in the world. The 96th most successful networking business in the world. Their revenues went up 400% in 2012 because it works. So give our stuff a try for 90 days. See how you feel. The proof of the pudding is in the eating. Please log on to my website if you're a guest. I have a radio show. It's free from 3 to 5 p.m. Central Time. Monday through Friday. You can listen to it through the internet. I have an online newsletter that you can sign up for. It's free.
And definitely check out my book, Fake Diseases. It covers all of the major topics that come up, like birth defects, blood sugar problems, bone and joint problems, cancer, autoimmune problems, and more. And it's on Amazon for just $9.99. And the audiobook read-along version is free here on YouTube, and the link for that is in the description of this video. Definitely get yourself a copy of Dr. Wallach's cookbook. This is basically a textbook teaching you everything you know about how to cook without the bad foods, particularly oil and gluten, and all of the other problematic things on the list. This is 300 pages stuffed full of recipes, every traditional recipe that you could think of, and modern dishes without the bad foods that they're usually made from. And of course, make sure to check out our food page, Notus Foods, that's on YouTube, and at Notus Foods on Instagram. We have a lot of content up there teaching you how to cook without the bad foods that Dr. Wallach describes, and Dr. Glidden's 12 bad foods, all of that, all of the rules that you need to know. And we have experienced chefs and bakers who will answer the questions in those inboxes. And I've also published a book in response to some of Dr. Wallach's criticisms, including the major articles that have been written against him on the internet. So if you are a Dr. Wallach fan or a longevity distributor, I definitely recommend having this book in your toolkit.